My name is Pauline Mayers. I work in the arts, so I'm a director, choreographer. The work that I make is all about bringing people together and having audiences actually part of the show, part of the action. Originally started out as a dancer, trained at a ballet school in London, and then spent like 15 years dancing in various dance companies up and down the country. Where I am, there is so much tension around being artistic, being a Black woman, and trying to express myself in that kind of place. So a lot of what I tweet about is around those issues. I also run a book club now since the lockdown. So there's about 20 of us, and we're reading books by Black female authors or women of colour, and primarily British authors. So we're on to book number 2 at the minute, which is great. And I like cycling and crochet and knitting.
I'm Melissa. I am Melissa Simmonds. I always call myself a born and bred Yorkshire lass, so I'm from Sheffield. I've lived in various places but come back to Sheffield. Both of my children have a diagnosis of autism. They're both autistic, and in them getting their diagnoses, I then realised and got a diagnosis as well. So I'm also autistic, which then kind of led me to wanting to find out more about it so that I could be the best advocate and parent for my children. And I'm in my final year of a master's in autism studies at Sheffield Hallam University. And I kind of went in there to find people who I could kind of have as representatives for my kids, for them to see Black autistic people and for them to see what these individuals are doing with their lives so that they know things are possible. And ended up in a very white room, white lecturers, white students, all the books are by white scholars, everything is white. And so even though I really did want to just go in the room and sit at the back and learn, I've had to be learning whilst kind of being very vocal about there being change in the community. So I'm learning and also advocating for Black autistics, and as well as my children. So it's exhausting, but I've made a decision that that's the hill I'm prepared to die on. I love music. I love Game of Thrones. I love Marvel Universe. I'm really proper geeky, nerdy. That used to be a really negative word. It's really fashionable now. I love doing poetry. I struggle to read now. I find it quite exhausting, so I do audiobooks. So that's really working for me at the minute. And I really need to be around Black women right now because I need to know that I'm not insane. This isn't all in my head. You know, what's going on is really affecting us differently. So that's it.
Hi everyone, I'm Furaha Asani. I am currently a part-time projects officer on a community engagement project at the University of Leicester, but my training is in biochemistry. I have a passion for social justice and for education, for higher education, but I've also done a lot of community outreach with people of different ages, ranging from really little ones to, excuse me, I feel like something is caught in my throat. And you know, nowadays, whenever there's something in the throat, you're always like, oh my goodness. Yeah. Another thing I'm passionate about letting people know is that if you want to get a degree and you go for it, really and truly let your age not stop you. Age should not stop people from pursuing any kind of education, be that further, higher, primary, secondary, whatever. So yeah, I'm very vocal on Twitter as well. I don't think my Twitter is the most professional, but you know what? It's fine. It is what it is. I am also currently a migrant precariat, so that means that I am kind of locked into a court battle with the Home Office because my visa was denied last year, and basically I don't know what's going to happen to me in a couple of months, and I'm very, very tired of people telling me how strong I am. Use that word. I'm absolutely exhausted with it. I don't know what my future is, and it's very, very scary to me, but I have to distract myself with other things. So in a sense, I say like I'm more scared of the UK Home Office than I am of COVID. I'm a mental health advocate because I live with mental illness. I have done from my earliest memories, and a lot of people that I love also struggle with their mental health. And it's really interesting that Melissa was talking about audiobooks, because for the past couple of years I've really struggled with reading. And I was talking to a friend of mine just before the lockdown, and just talking about my anxiety and talking about some of my struggles in the way that I learn and in the way that I absorb information. And he has learning disability, and he actually said to me, you know what, Farah, I think you need to speak to a specialist, because it may be that you have some kind of learning disability and you don't know. I mean, since it's been literally decades of you struggling with these particular things, it's worth having it checked out. And I'm really also sorry that I said something is wrong with me. And I think that shows that so many times those of us who are struggling with different things, we self-stigmatize.
Yeah.
So apologies for everyone who's watching if that has triggered you in any way. I really need to reframe the way I think about myself. Yeah. So I think for now that's it. My pronouns are she, her, and I am currently, just to say, I'm currently going through an anxious episode that has been on for a couple of weeks. So if I'm probably going to come across a little bit, or in my head, I feel like I come across a bit, I don't know, jittery or fidgety in some things that I say and in some ways that I express myself. And this is just me. So many times on Twitter, because I'm writing and I'm editing what I'm saying in my tweets, it doesn't come across there, but in person it may come across. But yeah, just to let you all know.
It's nice to be so relatable as well, because that's just, as a human being and as a woman, a Black woman for that matter, there's so much that's often put like it's distant to us. But I think I find a lot of what actually each and every one of you has said today very relatable. And I feel like I'm really going to enjoy these spaces because I thrive on just interacting with Black women. And I'm proud of that. I'm proud to say that. I haven't had as many moments in my adult life where I can just sit down and have Black women friends who I can just talk to and talk on topics that mean something more than my everyday existence. So thank you so much for allowing me to be part of this. My name is Chihana, Chihana. Thandi is my middle name, so a lot of my family members will call me Thandi or Thandiwe. And as I've grown older, I've tended to take ownership more of my name Tchiyiwe, mostly because it's spelled in a way that confuses people, and I kind of thrive on things like that. They just make people go like, huh? And I really want them to get it right. And I go out of my way to say, actually, you pronounce it this way. I know it looks confusing, but pronounce it the way you would pronounce any other name that's a bit complicated from the West. I was born in Bradford in Yorkshire, and I lived my formative years in Zambia, South Africa, and in Atlanta in America. And then I came back here in my mid-20s, and I'm now 40. I'll be 42 this month. This is May, so ooh, yeah. My interests are quite varied, and I've embraced the fact that I struggle with just taking on one identity when it comes to my career goals, my personal loves, and so I started off being a person who was embedded firmly within the human rights sector, working primarily on immigration and the rights of women. And then I loved writing, but I didn't think of it as something that I actually do. I just thought I like writing, and I've had a few poems published here and there, and I've contributed to some books. I've never really published on my own. So I'm now starting to take ownership of that identity as a writer. And I don't squeeze myself into one form of writing, because I do poetry, but I also write for magazines. So like Now Then magazine, and I used to blog before. So I have that identity, but I also do other things. I work for a company called Utopia Theatre as well. I'm not an artist. I'm not. I'm more of the sort of operational person. I love working in spaces. Now, after I turned 40, I think I made a deliberate decision that I wanted to be happy. And part of my happiness includes me saying, actually, the Black identity you've been preaching to me is not the Black identity I know. And so you're going to see it and experience it through me. And I'm going to be very happy doing that. And so this is where I am. So that's how I'm feeling today. I'm feeling very happy being amongst Black people, because this is one of the decisions I deliberately made. I'm going to be amongst Black women and do things that just enhance the visibility of Black women, their identity and their happiness as well. So thanks for having me.
You know, when you say, when you're talking about making this decision about when you turn 40, that you were going to kind of seize your life and, you know, take control of your life. For me, that happened. So I'm turning 34 on the last day of July. And that happened with me for my 30s, because I feel like I lost my 20s to horrible anxiety. So I was so focused on, because I felt like I couldn't control my mind, basically. One thing that I was definitely going to try to do was get as good grades as I could. So uni was basically focused on staying alive and getting good grades. And that was what I did. And that was how I trained myself to cope. And then I started my PhD towards the end of my 20s. And by the day that I turned 30, I had, some months before that, I had lost my dad unexpectedly. And I think I just, at that time, made a conscious decision that, okay, I have really, really been struggling within myself. And I want my 30s to be a brilliant decade for everything that I feel that I've lost in my 20s. And that I've not had the strength to do, just simply because all of my energies were focused on staying alive. So I think that's something that we need to talk about, the fact that society will make us think that certain decades are the decades when things should happen. And if it doesn't happen, you know, in your 20s, if it doesn't happen in your 30s, in your 40s, you know, in your 50s, like you've kind of wasted, you've wasted away. How is that a healthy, and how is that even a natural way of thinking?
I think for me, I think your teens are, for me, my teens were just trying to emulate and kind of figure out how I'm supposed to act as a teen. You know, there were lots of girls who, you know, they makeup was really important to them, high heel shoes, and I kind of was more of a tomboy, but wanted boys to be interested in me, so was trying to kind of figure out how to be more feminine, you know. My 20s, I was just unhappy, my entire 20s. My 20s was spent trying to please men, trying to be the woman every man wants, trying to kind of figure out my mental health problems, because I was just so unhappy. Everything was kind of doom and gloom. My 30s were spent just trying to work on me and figure me out and figure out what works for me. What do I like? What don't I like? Because, like, I've been married a long time, and when I got married, I thought it was my job to make my husband happy, and then it was his job to make me happy. So if we're both making each other happy, then we're going to be happy. And I found for my husband, he was in the honeymoon period for like 4 months after we got married, you know, all lovey-dovey. For me, it went on for years. So I just wanted to be in his presence all the time. I wanted to please him. I didn't understand when he didn't want to be with me, like, you know, if he wants to go out with his friends. I just didn't know what my role was. And I think part of that is I grew up in a family where it was all single parents. So it was all the mums raising their children. So I didn't see kind of how relationships are supposed to be. I had to figure it out as I went along. So 20s, I was unhappy. 30s, I was like, okay, I need to figure me out, because I don't want my kids seeing this. I don't want my daughter thinking this is how a woman's supposed to be. I don't want my son thinking this is how, you know, his spouse or his partner should be. She shouldn't be this unhappy. She shouldn't be this isolated. And so my 30s was just me becoming more independent, and me kind of almost saying to my husband, I'm doing this at this time, so I need you to be home to look after the kids. There was no more asking. There was no more saying to friends, oh, I can't do it, in the hopes that me and my husband would do something together. So I started to kind of independently make and solidify friendships that mattered. And so when I got to 39, 40, I made a bucket list of things I wanted to kind of tick off my box. And it was going well until, because like I'm 41 this month, I'm 41 in a couple of weeks' time. And so I'm at the very beginning of the 40s. But I always say to people, yeah, I'm really depressed at the minute, because I do suffer with depression, suffer with chronic fatigue syndrome. So I'm really depressed. I'm really confused about what's going on in the world right now, but I'm still living my best life. And I realized that you can feel more than one thing at a time.
Yes.
I always used to explain to my kids that mums have got really special hearts. They can feel more than one thing. So, you know, I can feel really disappointed with something you've done. I can feel really angry with you, but I still love you.
Mm-hmm.
So mums can feel lots of different things. And I was telling them that to reassure them, but I didn't believe it myself. And so now I do accept that. I am really depressed at the minute. I'm really, really depressed and struggling, but I'm still the happiest I've ever been. I'm still the most confident I've ever been. And so I've got to learn, I'm learning to live in those two feelings at the same time, because I didn't think you were allowed to do that. I didn't think that's how it was. And I'm definitely finding this is how it is. So when I remember Princess Diana, when she gave Prince Charles that card about life begins at 40. And I was really little, so it meant nothing. 40 was old. But now I'm 40, and actually I understand exactly what that means now. You know, I'm figuring me out, and yeah, this year's shit, but I'm still the happiest I've ever been.
You know, for me, it was slightly different. My teens was pretty fraught. I ended up leaving home at the age of 15. But the one thing that I was really intent on being was a dancer. That was my big dream. And by the time I got to 18, and I went to a top ballet school in the country, Rambert, which is based in London. And at the time, I was the first British black girl to get into the school. In my year, there was about 5 of us, women of colour, in the group. And it was tough. It was really tough being a dancer at a ballet school with teachers from the Royal Ballet or elsewhere. And I just did not fit into the idea of a dancer, because I was black. I was from Hackney in London, didn't mind my P's and Q's, you know, and the training was very tough, but it was something I was determined to get through and actually do. And there was a lot of opposition to me, you know. I had teachers saying things like, you know, you'll never be a dancer because you're black, and that's just not how it runs, you know. And I always just thought, well, I don't really care what you think, because as far as I'm concerned, I am going to be a dancer, that's it. And through my time as being a dancer, there were points where, you know, there's one director who was incredibly racist and misogynistic, and I totally railed against that. this particular director was saying things like, oh, look at Pauline, she's from Hackney, she should be on benefits with 5 kids wrapped around her neck, but I've saved her. I mean, it really offensive stuff that I would always rail against, but I couldn't quite put my finger on why it was that I was the only one in the company, and often I was the only black person, let alone black woman, in these companies. And then when I moved to, so that was throughout my 20s, and during my 20s, I traveled the world with various dance companies, and it was great. I had a good time, the idea of all of us being in this together, and, there was no more of the kind of extraordinarily fraught racial tensions that was happening when I was a kid, and the kind of the riots that happened up and down the country, which happened in the early 80s. I saw that, but I wasn't really affected by that. I was just concentrating on my dancing. That was the thing. I think it was in my 30s that I began to kind of go, something's not right here. I moved to Leeds. I joined a dance company here, Phoenix Dance Theatre, as it's known now. It was a black dance company. 2005, I ruptured my Achilles tendon, which is the little kind of tendon right at the back of your ankle. And if that goes, then you literally can't walk. So that was me for like 3 months. But that was the beginning of an intense period between 2005 and 2011 of me struggling to get back to full health and conditioning, and then realize that actually I was being sidelined for everything. Yet at the same time, if there were projects or companies that were in trouble, they would kind of give me a call. So I ended up calling myself Bailout Pauline, because it seemed I was good enough to kind of figure out what was going wrong with people's projects, but somehow I wasn't good enough to lead. And it was really intense in terms of the ways in which people would absolutely dismiss me, belittle me, at points try to humiliate me. I mean, it was a point where I just thought there's something really amiss here. Yeah, I mean, people were literally like, oh, Pauline, you're not quite good enough to lead on stuff. And I'm like, well, I'm seeing that body that's just come from out of college. And they're doing things straight away. So, and I've been doing this for like 15 years. So, and not just in terms of dance, like I was able to teach from very little ones, 3-year-olds, right the way through to the elderly, those with disabilities, those with learning difficulties. I was incredibly well versed in terms of facilitation, not just in terms of workshops, but also in terms of making dance, So I had an extraordinarily broad experience that was also very, very technical, but yet the people around me were constantly trying to tell me that I wasn't good enough. And it was like, no, I'm not. It's one thing if you think I'm not good enough, but you can't tell me I'm not good enough at all. I've worked with all these dance companies. So in 2011, I basically had enough of that, and I thought, I needed to come out from that, because it was from 2005 to 2011, I basically spent all of that time being on benefits and welfare, or trying to work within retail, because that was the only way I could survive. I changed disciplines. So I went from dance into theatre in 2011. And with that, all the work just kept coming. It didn't stop, actually. And it was interesting, because it was like, well, wait a minute, I was involved in the dance sector for like 15 odd years and got nothing for 7. And yet as soon as I went into theatre, it was crazy. The amount of collaborations, the amount of work I was getting was quite mental. But with all of it, I was never seen as the person who was leading, even though I was at points. So I kind of started to think, well, something else is going on here. This is far more than just talent or experience. Something else is happening. And I started really to get political about 6 years ago, something like that. Initially, it was in terms of the politics that was going on. So, of course, in Yorkshire, we had our first member of European Parliament. That was, what's the name? It wasn't the Brexit Party.
UKIP.
It was Nigel Farage's party. UKIP. Yeah, UKIP, thank you. And I was like, this is horrific. Like, what's going on? Why have we got a UKIP member of European Parliament representing me? Like, what the hell? So I started to get kind of political at that point. And around the same time, started to kind of try to figure out, like, who am I in all of this? I spent so much of my time kind of trying to be the best, trying to not just be the best for me, but really excel in everything that I was doing, because I genuinely thought at that moment, I just have to get better. It didn't occur to me that actually there might be a small thing like called racism and anti-blackness that might be stopping me from progressing.
Yeah.
And I think maybe about 2 years ago, I thought, right, well, I need to just leave all of this, because it's getting to the point where, even though I'd done this incredible work, nobody was recognising me for it. So I made a show called What If I Told You, which was very successful, and it did three things. It talked about the ways that people racialised my body and my experience and diminished that. It was also about the work of a American gynecologist from the 1800s, a man called James Marion Sims, who kind of perfected the vaginal speculum. And I sat that next to each other and basically was like, why are we still in this place of kind of looking at Black women, or, you know, as just fodder and kind of impervious to pain, when actually all we suffer is pain at certain points, you know. And we're not recognized as being in pain. We're always recognized as being strong, and that's, you know, something that I totally relate to. The show was a success, and then with that, I really felt like I needed to touch more in terms of who am I emotionally. So kind of like, that was kind of like beginning of my 40s. I'm now at the end of my 40s. I'm going to be 50 this year, which is not which is not something I thought. Yeah, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, you know, and it's a funny thing, because I think to myself, like, I spend a lot of my time trying to get to spaces like this, actually, because in the arenas in which I work, there are Black women, but they've been so kind of cast aside by the arts sector here. They've suffered burnout, and they just don't want to engage with the main arts sector. They're still doing a lot of incredible work, but just not in the main arts sector. Whereas for me, I think it's important not only that I stay in the arts as much as I can, but people see who I am, actually, for all of that entails, and that includes the bad stuff as well as the good. So it's been quite my 40s has been almost like a renaissance, I would say, for myself. Kind of a reintegration of myself, something that was kind of trained out of me in my early 20s, and I, you know, that kind of place of trying to continue to be better, please people, all of that stuff, which I think actually is quite indicative of the 20s and 30s anyway. But it feels like, do you know what I mean? It feels like to me like I've really come into my own in my 40s, and I'm a real kind of like me or don't like me. I'm not really particularly bothered about that. But if you have something really interesting to say, something where I can learn and we can benefit together, that's the spaces that I want to kind of inhabit. And then with that, I'm able to start to really understand emotionally who I am, not just as a creative, but actually as a Black woman, as a woman.
Yes, yeah.
You know.
So do you think there's a point where probably each one of us, that we can point to and say, that was actually racism? Is there something that you put it back to where you realized what that was? Furaha, you're nodding really hard.
So for me, I had some experiences during my master's that I kept at the time, and this was from 2011 to 2012. At the time, I kept kind of closing my eyes to, and it was only years later, I think maybe 2014, probably 2014 onwards, that I was like, you know what? I didn't want to say that this was racist behavior because I had admired the person who treated me this way, but it was racist. It was definitely racist, especially in light of the fact that within this particular setting, I was the only Black person, and I was the only person who was treated in the way that I was. So this is an academic setting, and it didn't make sense to me being the top student, having come into that space, being the top student and getting the treatment that I got, and seeing other people get away with certain things, whereas when it was me, there was like I was put under a microscope. And at the time, I think, I don't know what was going on, but I think I just kept telling myself that, oh no, like, this is to make me a better scientist. This is to make me a better person. This is just, because we're in a culture of perfectionism within the sector. So all sorts going through my mind. And I think if it had happened to somebody else, I would have called it for what it was. But like I said, because of the dynamic and me saying, oh no, but this person, I think this person loves me. I hope this person loves me. And I hope that they're invested in me. I just didn't want to call it for what it was till years later. So, so I'm being very cryptic because, but you can guess what the racial dynamics were. And as I said, like, I was the only, within this particular scenario, I was the only Black person. Or rather, not racial, you can guess what the gender dynamics were there. But I will say that it took me years to get over the damage that was done to my morale. And in fact, I think that there's still, now I'm so much more healthier in terms of how I view myself as a scientist, or as a scientist adjacent, if I say. I want to become a bioethicist or an expert in science pedagogy, but it's taken me years to get over the damage that was done at that point in time. But I can see the lingering effects in whenever I question myself, whenever I'm in a room and say, do you have the right to be here? Do you have the expertise to be here? And it has permeated not just academic settings for me, but in other, whenever I feel that I'm speaking to, not just friends, if I'm in a setting where I feel these are experts, I always have this. So basically, it's imposter syndrome, isn't it? Syndrome. And I feel that was fueled. So I'm not going to shirk off responsibility because I know that my anxiety breeds imposter syndrome anyway. And some other phobias and some other very unhealthy experiences in my life. At the same time, I do feel that so many things were taken advantage of in that time in my life, and it was easy to kind of do things to me or sabotage certain areas in my career because it was known that I wouldn't fight back. And very unfortunately, my anxiety held on to certain things that were said about me. And so for instance, I'll give you one example. I was called a substandard student. Now, this is me who had entered this space being the top student in my class, and I was referred to as a substandard student. And I feel like even till today, sorry, there's someone lingering outside my window. Social distancing, people in clusters. They're not Black people.
Don't even get me started.
They're not Black people. That's all I'm gonna say. Anyway, so every time I enter a space, there is an echo, even if it's with different words. There is an echo of something, asking me, "Do you deserve to be here?" And I'm not talking about, there is a responsible, do you deserve to be here? For instance, as a light-skinned Black woman, if I'm entering a space, I'm conscious of, am I taking, space from a dark-skinned Black woman? So that is responsibly asking myself that question. Or if I'm speaking over my students, responsibly asking myself that question, do you And it's not even about do you deserve, should you be here? Are you taking someone else's space? So there's an absolutely appropriate time to ask that question. That is not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the unhealthy, you know, it's like that little demon just whispering, who are you? What is your right to be here? And I can trace that back to 10 years ago, from the moment that I was referred to as a substandard student. So even though I have gotten over, like literally, I have gotten over that phase, I carried so much bitterness, but now I've gotten over it, but it just frustrates the fuck out of me that I'm still fighting this and I don't know how. I don't know to let it go. Like I say, maybe it's a function of my anxiety, maybe.
No,
But
I wouldn't say it's exclusively a function of your anxiety. That would probably enhance it or exacerbate how you relate to it. But frankly speaking, the systems are so much in place and well embedded and institutionalized to make us feel that way. So you've been moved into a place where you are expected to be, if you can, and it's very, especially in the British system, I find it's very what do you call it? What's that word? I'm trying to find a word. It's very sophisticated in the way it's done to us.
I just, you know, with what Pauline was saying, it's so we know the adage that, you know, words can really, you know, affect people's lives, and we know that that is true. It's just, you know, when they're racialized, my question is also, what kind of wickedness in people's hearts? What kind of wickedness must there be to feel so free to fling words around that will have a lifelong effect on a person? And now this is just the words we're talking about. We're not even talking about the structures and the systems and the institutions. But also now in my 30s, I'm finding that just like what Melissa said is, I am inhabiting several feelings at once. So when I was talking about this just now, I felt very, very hurt. And I'm like, ooh, okay, I don't really want to deal with that now. But I'm happy with the woman that I am. And I know that there's still loads of stuff that I want to do, and that loads of work that I want to do within myself. At the same time, I am going through the anxious phase over the past couple of weeks till today that I mentioned. And I'm still having a good time living by myself in my house, in my lockdown. And, you know, doing things that make me happy. So again, just like Melissa said, there's so many things that are happening at once. And I think it's towards my late 20s and now in my 30s that I have been able to say it's absolutely okay to have these like parallel realities, or one reality with parallel feelings, if that makes sense.
I think human beings are complicated creatures anyway, without the isms being slapped on top, right? And so, of course, it's possible to inhabit multiple emotions at any one moment. That is something that we know. I think where we are, you know, being in the UK, we have this, the kind of the British understanding. And what I mean by British is like, obviously, the white British understanding, because Britain doesn't want to ever recognise that it's actually off the backs of black women that it was built, right? So it's got this real kind of thing about, you know, being stoic, you know, keep calm and carry on, and all that kind of palaver, and any sense of emotion, particularly as black women. It seems like the only emotions that people understand is either being angry or being strong. And that's it. And it strips away the humanity of the situation. And, you know, Furaha, you were saying earlier, like, you know, what kind of wickedness is it in people's hearts? Do you know what? A lot of people don't even realize they're doing it.
Yeah.
This thing that's been going on for the last 400 years, and they just don't understand that they have been programmed to do this stuff. I was doing a lot of research around kind of the enslavement period, and particularly Barbados, which is where my parents are from. And outside of realizing that Barbados was like literally, that was the epicenter of the British slave trade, I came across something called the Act for the Better Governing and Ordering of Negroes. That was from 1661. And it practically begins with, Africans are wild and barbarous and savage, okay? Now, this piece of legislation, which was created in the Commonwealth, was read across the Caribbean in churches across the Caribbean for 200 years. There you are programming white people to understand that Africans, dark-skinned people, are wild and barbarous and savage at exactly the moment that you guys were being wild and barbarous and savage with the African peoples, transporting them from across Africa into the Caribbean, beating, raping, God knows whatever else. And you don't think you've been affected by that for 400 years? Of course you're going to have a sense of superiority, because that's what you've been told. There we go. You know, it's intense. And the thing is, what people don't realise is, at the same time that as Black peoples, general, that we've been holding trauma and passing that down to the generations, our white counterparts have been holding that sense of superiority and having that. So they don't understand that they're being racist. They genuinely are often taken aback. They're kind of, oh, I'm not racist. It's almost being worse to be called a racist rather than actually doing the racist thing. It gets to a point where you kind of understand that actually there's an enormous amount of white people who literally do not understand themselves. Literally. We've got no choice but to try to understand ourselves, because the structures that within which we live are constantly telling us we are not from here, we are not of here, we're not meant to be here, we're not deserving to be here. So we've got to touch more in terms of emotionally, psychologically who we are. Our white counterparts don't have to do that because they don't have that extra stress, you know. So it's something where actually, you know, particularly for me over the last like 4 or 5 years, I've come to really understand that there are programmed ways in which white people will engage, right? And we've seen it on Twitter. A Black woman says something, you can guarantee the people that was going to come forward and have a problem with what she's saying, not even listening, but instantly have a problem. They're triggered, and they don't even realize that they're being triggered. And often it's a triggering where not only do they not understand it, they don't even know what they're talking about a lot of the time, but you can see that response is exactly the same. And it's almost like there's this collective response that happens with white peoples, and they don't know that they're doing it. It's like the skin touching or the hair touching, you know, which I've had, you know, people will just randomly without consent touch my hair, and the response is always the same. I will tell people, don't touch me, and then the response is white tears. And they don't even realize that it doesn't matter who the person is. They don't know each other. They could be from different parts of the country, but the same thing happens. Now, if that isn't programming, I don't know what is.
It's true. I mean, very recently, because I've got the children, we watch a lot of horrible histories, which actually is a really good way of teaching kids in a very funny way, in a short bite-sized way about history. And I think it's 10 years old, but it resurfaced, but it's everywhere anyway. But there is one about the empire and the singing, and Queen, is it Queen Victoria or Queen Elizabeth? Victoria. And she's singing about how wonderful the empire is, and how wonderful, you know, all these things we've got, how it's lovely to have a cup of tea, and how it's lovely to put sugar in your tea. And then I think it's her servant, he's singing to her, and he's saying, well, actually, no, that's not from England, that's from India, that's from the Caribbean. And it's really good, it's really informative. And the white people lost their shit, because they're like, they're saying, like, you know, why are you being so negative? You know, we helped to end slavery. That was one that they were complaining about. They said, you know, they talk about how we all profited from the Commonwealth and the empire. They talked about, you know, we're being racist. They were being racist towards the UK people. They talked about as well how, you know, it's over. I never had a slave. This was hundreds of years ago. We have to get over this. And they're saying that at the same time as losing their shit, where actually the song was really factual. and saying, oh no, this is from India. Oh no, the sugar's from the Caribbean. And it was like, I guess I think to myself, is there ever times where, because I'm teaching my kids to be critical thinkers, I'm trying to teach them whatever information they're given, just sit for a minute. Does it feel uncomfortable? Yeah, why does it feel uncomfortable? Oh, well, it feels uncomfortable because, and I'm trying to teach them to be like that. But I'm seeing grown-ass people who don't have that ability, and it's because they're privileged, and they think privilege means a lot of money, pretty car, owning your own home. You know, they're like, I'm not privileged. You know, I live in a council house. And I was like, yeah, but the system is still set up to favour you and not to favour me. And they don't get it, but I still continue to talk about it. And I guess one of the things, as you were all talking, and you mentioned burnout earlier, Pauline, about some of the women in the arts, and they've left because of burnout. And I suffer a lot of burnout. And even last week, I was really angry. I'm really angry what's going on with COVID. And, you know, people on the front line, because my mum's on the front line, she doesn't have the right protective clothing. So I'm really angry, but she's doing her job. She works for the NHS. And people seem to be getting angry because I'm putting up articles, factual articles, about the fact that more Black and brown people, NHS staff and key workers are dying. And I talked about, because I remember, I loved the South Park movie, and there's a part in the movie where they're going to battle the devil, yeah, and you've got all these soldiers. But then, remember Chef in South Park? But he's part of a platoon where they're all Black. And the soldier, the head of the army is saying, okay, we want your platoon to go in first, yeah? And then we'll come after. And obviously all the soldiers look around and they're like, wait a minute, we're all Black and we're going in first, we're going to end up being killed, kind of thing. And so I compared it to that and saying, you know, we're on the front line, we're not being protected. And I had white people losing their shit because they're saying, we're dying as well, we've come out of retirement as well, we're working as well. And I'm like, I am not insecure enough to have to do or say things like that. When I'm talking about a Black and a brown person's experience, I'm talking about it because the white community aren't, you know. Of course white people are dying. That goes without saying. But when I'm seeing it, when I'm seeing on social media, even in Sheffield, the newspapers, they're putting up all the pictures of the nurses. It was all white nurses they're putting up who were taking selfies, and they're saying, oh, thank you for everything you're doing. And I'm like, wait a minute, where's the Black people? Where's the Asian people? You know, I'm not seeing any of those people taking selfies and putting pictures up. And then, you know, the newspaper's like, well, it's not our fault because it's people who sent us their pictures. It's not our fault if a Black person didn't do that. And it's like, it's that disconnect. So for the positive pictures and for the positive thing, it's all white people in the NHS. Thank you for everything you're doing. But then the actual people that are dying look very different. Their shades are very different. And it's that hypocritical.
Can I come in there, Melissa?
Yeah.
Melissa, what do you think? I followed that discussion with the Star. What do you think would have happened had the Star owned up, as opposed to saying, well, people didn't send in pictures from the Black and Asian community? What's the worst? What do you think? Nancy Fielder, the director of the Star, could have done differently. If she had done it differently, what do you think would have happened?
I think she should have apologized without saying, well, it's not my fault, first of all. So she did the whole, you know, white woman cry. You know, it's not my fault. You're all, you Black women are all shouting at me and it's not fair. Well, actually, the money you earn in the position you're in, you take responsibility when you mess up. I mean, 2 days after, they hired a Black person, a Black reporter, and he kind of issued his first article talking about what it was like as him growing up as a Black person in Sheffield. And then they put up like a stock picture of NHS people of all different colours. But I think they could have just apologized and said, you know, we're sorry, you're absolutely right, and we're going to try and do better. I think if they had done that, I think then what happens is some of the people who follow the star then lose respect for them. And they're the white militant racists who jump on anything about, you know, paedophile rings or crimes that immigrants have done. You know, whenever something like that is put on social media, the things you see that's written underneath is absolutely horrible. And so if the star apologized about what they've done, I think people like that would rant about it. They'd be angry. They'd be like, oh, you're a snowflake, oh, you're being liberal. But actually it's your job as somebody who's supposed to be giving us factual information. It's your job to own up to when you're wrong. Because me as a parent, when I'm wrong, I apologize to my children.
Does this translate into what happens generally when we're having this? Because lately, I think a lot of us are moving towards actually saying, you know what, you're going to teach each other about racism. I'm not going to be the person because of the burnout. But is this one of the reasons why? Is it that when we have tried to engage in these conversations, the kind of pushback we face is one of maybe fear, or is it always best that this conversation on race and racism should be had amongst white people themselves, as opposed to us Black people doing the work?
Beginning to be an understanding that white people have to have a conversation about their whiteness, right? So there's books by people like Robin DiAngelo, you know, here in Leeds, there's a woman called Shona Hunter. There's a white woman talking about whiteness. You know, this is actually beginning to happen already. In America, it's massive. Over here, it feels like it's just beginning. I think there's people over in Birmingham University was doing it, but it's not going out into the public sphere. And that is where the problem is, you know. And I think, you know, something that Melissa said about, you know, white people generally speaking say, oh, you know, we ended slavery. Well, if that's the case, why is it that we're not celebrating the day that we ended slavery? Why is that not a national holiday? If you really want to go down that route, right, why are we not celebrating it? If you you know, because actually we bloody well started it. You know, Britain started that shit, transported it around, and then went to America. You know, there's a reason why these things aren't being celebrated. There's a reason why whiteness refuses to acknowledge and reintegrate the history to understand that actually white people have done some very heinous shit around the world. Around the world. The British Empire was probably the most murderous point in British history. You know,
and so we cry more about the Holocaust.
Right. And why is that? Because actually it was predominantly white European Jews. That was what it is, you know. So, you know, people say things like, oh, you need to get over it. Well, you know, we were all of us paying our taxes, were paying off compensation to the slave owners to the tune of £18 billion, something like that, up until and including 2015. So actually, there's no sense of getting over it. The stately home was set up because of it. Education was set up because of it. The political structures were set up because of it. The Industrial Revolution was funded by the profits from the slave trade. So the problem is that white people genuinely do not know what their history is.
Are we Black people, though, documenting it well enough for it to become mainstream? I feel like there's this responsibility. I feel now more responsible when I talk about embracing these platforms that we are creating. I feel like we should do a bit more in terms of documenting this, because we can't expect them to do it because they're not willing to do it anyway. Like the way they glamorize and romanticize the empire. You know, if that perspective came from me, that would be ridiculous, because there's nothing romantic about it. I've seen the effects of colonialism in Zambia. I've seen the effects of colonialism in Zimbabwe. They're still far-reaching and far-ranging. You know, what can we do? What should we be doing to get this there, to become more mainstream knowledge? Because it's not in schools either.
I mean, I mean, the only way that I'm doing it is through the work that I'm making, actually. And that's the only way to do it, you know, to take the information that you know, that you understand, and put that into the work that you're doing. Now, the problem is with that is there is and that's where burnout could occur, is that you're always in that educating role. So if you're always in the educating role, it means you're always giving, you know, and that means you're always being questioned. And that means you've always got to give an answer. So it ends up being like an ongoing thing. But like the work that I make, I leave audiences to come up with their own conclusions. I literally leave the space and kind of go, it's your conversation now, because I've done my bit and I'm in the pub, you know.
I'm out of here.
You got to think about this, you know, that those places of reflection is a thing that people need to start to do, to really understand what is the thing that I'm doing, how am I contributing to it or not, am I being an ally or am I not, am I being triggered or am I not? We're not a very reflective society at all. We are responsive and we are workers, and that's how society sees its people. It doesn't see its subjects. You know, the British subjects are not seen as thinking people. They are seen as work fodder. So from that perspective, it's about how what are the ways in which not only do we show people this is happening and this is a real thing, but enable people to actually reflect on this information instead of the knee-jerk reaction, you know, the whole thing of we ended slavery, all of that rubbish right there. It doesn't you know, it tells me that you don't know your history, actually. You know.
Do you know how it started?
I think now's the time where, you know, when you say, well, what can we do? I think, you know, we need to use our platforms, whatever that is, we need to use it responsibly. And that's both for educating others, but also trying to limit the amount of burnout that we have. So having spaces like this where you kind of look out for one another as Black women, you know, try and uplift and elevate and motivate and support. I think it's important as well. So I've got that workshop and it's called Black History for Dummies and White Teachers, because you have these teachers who are teaching the kids foolishness for Black History Month. It hurts me to my core when my daughter's coming home and they're learning about things like Drake for Black History Month, and I'm like, what? And this was just after he had the baby with that porn star. And like I said, if you want to have a baby with a porn star, that's none of my business, but surely there are other people who you could find for Black History Month, you know? So I've got that workshop, but I think it's very important to have white allies. And they're people who can get into spaces that we can't, because when we're in certain spaces, the dynamics change and people might not want to say things because of fear of, I'm going to be jumped on, you know, she's going to argue with me, I'm going to say it wrong, I'm going to do it wrong. So they might then take a seat and not speak their mind. And so you need white allies in those spaces to educate and inform and question the other white people in the space when they're saying things that are racist, when they're saying things that are prejudice. And I mean, for me, I do have white allies around me, and I feel really, really fortunate because I think not everybody does. And so I've got really good Black friends around me, but I've also got really good white friends who own their shit, you know? So I think
that's important.
It has to, we have to approach it from so many different ways, I feel.
I just wanted to say that, you know, there's so much information out there and there's so many resources and so many reading lists that are available. So I really feel if people want to do the work, then they have a starting point. This is not work that, it's not like nothing has been documented. So many Black people have been, for decades, providing insight into the Black experience and into what they feel it would take to dismantle racist structures. So thank you so much for having me in this conversation. Looking forward to speaking to you all again. I have to run, and enjoy the rest of the conversation.
Bye.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.